My story takes place in a backwoods town in southeastern rural Kentucky. It's a small town you've likely never heard of, its people sparsely peppering the mountainside to and fro. It's the type of town where it isn't exactly uncommon to find neighbors bartering for goods and livestock and services, living off what the land provides, and generally making do with what they've got. It was here that my father was raised. It is here that my father raised his family. Now my father was a proud man, short, barely 5'7", but stout. He was many things: a mountaineer, a carpenter, a survivor, a hunter, but mostly he was proud. He instilled in me all of the virtues that I believe in today. He's the type of man that would give you the last dollar to his name, the type that would go hungry to make sure his kids were fed, and there were times that he did. I suppose I should clarify that I grew up in poverty. I have no doubt that there were people worse off than we are, but times are hard nonetheless. My father worked intermittently, mostly in construction. There were few homes within our community that he did not at least help with. He built our house from the ground up, dug out the basement and leveled the land with little more than a shovel, a wheelbarrow, and the helping hands of my uncle and 2 older brothers. Our house sat on a hillside in a leveled-out alcove. The yard outstretched on for what seemed like an eternity, ending at a fresh mountain brook with a woodland just beyond. He spent a lot of time in those woods, hiking trails, digging ginseng, hunting, and otherwise passing the hours by. The mountains provided our family with many necessities. Our water was pumped from a mine near the mountain's peak. Our food consisted mostly of game and livestock, and our income often came in the form of valuable roots. My mother is a wonderful cook. She had a particular fondness of chicken, which we raised. My father, on the other hand, preferred game. No stranger to the culinary arts, he was adept at preparing a wide variety of dishes, all of which he tracked, killed, and prepared himself. Long before the sun would rise, he would set out with little more than a flashlight. He would follow the mountain stream before turning off on one of the many mine roads that were carved out along the terrain. One such road ran an old graveyard long since forgotten by the rest of the world. Some of the headstones were dated back to the onset of the 19th century. I recall one night my father deciding to go spotting. For those of you unfamiliar, spotting is a common practice among Appalachian hunters, perhaps amongst hunters in general, but I'm no hunter, so I'm not entirely sure. The hunter sets out before the sun, as my father often did, with a flashlight. The flashlight is used much like a spotlight by scanning it back and forth over the landscape. The hunter hopes to catch a glimpse of the animal's eyes. You see, the eyes of an animal are luminous, and in complete darkness, when the light passes over them, they will shine. This is a method of establishing good hunting venues. This particular night, my father broke tradition and decided to bring his shotgun with him on the spotting expedition. A decision that, I would later learn, saved his life. It was a warm spring night. I was always a night owl, so when my father stirred, I was still awake, playing my Super Nintendo. It wasn't a school night, so he greeted me with his ever-present smile. "Hey, big man," he chimed. "You're up late." "I want to beat Mario," I told him, my eyes never leaving the screen for the briefest of moments. Long enough to see I saw him trying to tie his boots. He didn't respond. He just continued to smile and rubbed my head as he passed me on his way to the gun cabinet. From it he removed his 12-gauge shotgun, some rounds, a miner's light. The light, I recall, strapped to his forehead and attached to a rather large battery that hung from his waist. He then made his way to the couch and sat next to me, casually lifting the TV remote. He waited for me to finish the level. "Pause it," he requested. "I need to check the forecast." I obliged, and he flipped through the channels. He watched the forecaster ramble about weather and seemed content. "Not giving for rain today," he nodded approvingly. "Well, that's good." He changed the channel back and returned to me. "Okay, now you can go back to your game. I'm heading out. We'll be back in a little while. When your mother wakes up, tell her I'm bringing home supper. Tonight we're going to have rabbit." He kissed my forehead as he stood. I smiled at him as he rounded the hallway corner to our front door. I listened to the door shut and the clunk of his boots as he made his way off the porch, down the steps and through the yard. his steps fading in the distance. From that point on, I cannot vouch for the validity of my tale, but I can tell you the man who returned was not the man that left. Make no mistakes, my father did return, but he was a changed man. He never spoke much of that night until after I started college. This is his story. Like most other nights, he headed up the mountains via a trail that ran alongside the brook. The air was still and warm. The moon and stars shining brightly. There were no clouds and the forecast was clear. The sounds of cicadas and crickets filled the air. He made his way along the trail, intermittently shining light on either side of the stream. He followed it until he reached a fork in the path. To his left was his customary turnoff. Further up that trail was an old slate dump. Above it was a derelict coal chute. He shined his light along the trail and contemplated. He had been talking with his hunting buddies, and they had mentioned a sweet spot near the abandoned cemetery. A warren of rabbits had taken up residence in the graveyard, and they had all had good fortune while hunting there. The right trail continued along the stream, towards the mine where we drew our water. They passed by the cemetery where the rabbits were said to reside. After some consideration, he continued to follow the stream, making his way to the cemetery. Upon arriving, he skimmed his light back and forth across the plots. If there was a warren there of rabbits, it was certainly not being active tonight. He trudged among the tombstones until finally deciding to move on. He walked back to the trail and stopped. He could go back towards the slate dump. At the very least, he thought, he could cover ground he was used to hunting. Instead, he decided to continue up the mountain. He hadn't been walking very long before he noticed a particular phenomenon. The light from the moon and stars had disappeared. He was enveloped in darkness. Clouds covered the sky, and in the distance somewhere there was a flash of lightning. He counted the seconds to the thunder. The sky roared, then fell silent. There was no rain. Silently he observed his surroundings, tracing the light on either side of the trail, pausing for the briefest of moments. He trekked on. As he walked, and he noticed something else, very faintly, very rhythmically. His footsteps were echoing. This was unusual. If you've ever been in a wooded area, one thing you'll notice is that the mountains are excellent listeners and seldom repeat what they are told. It was then that the silence consumed him. The cicadas, the crickets, the owls, they were all hushed. My father stopped and shined the light around him. He saw nothing, so he continued along the trail. The echo was silent for a moment, but then stirred up again. With every crunch of his footsteps, he could hear a crunch simultaneously hit the trail behind him. Someone, or something, was following him, deliberately, stalking him. He stopped again, and so did his echo. He shined the light around him once more, in all directions, down the trail, into the trees, and even into the air. Nothing. He observed his surroundings. It was then he began to notice another trail, not 3 feet from him on the other side of the brush. Silently he began devising a plan. He decided that he would not begin walking again, and when the echo recommenced, he would take another step, but he'd stop before his foot hit the ground. If it was just an echo, if he were just hearing things, or his mind was playing tricks on him, then the echo would stop too. He turned up the trail and continued along his way. Within moments the echo re-emerged. He waited until he was confident that the timing was right. He stopped mid-step. His foot was barely an inch off the ground. The sound resonated through his very being, sending shivers down his spine. He wheeled around, shining his light again, only to be greeted by darkness. He turned back up the trail, quickening his pace. Again he heard the footsteps behind him, only this time the strides did not mimic his own. They were faster, louder. It dawned on him at this point his stalker, whatever it was, no longer interested in remaining unnoticed. He loaded his gun as another plan developed in his mind. He decided to step through the brush to the trail on the other side. There he would wait for it to pass him, and he would turn the tides. Without hesitation, he cut off his light, stepped across the brush, and waited in the darkness. The sound of its strides continuing up the trail before coming to a halt. It sounded mere feet away. Then it crossed through the brush. It was standing beside him. His stomach sank as he fumbled for his light. He could feel eyes burning into his skin, boring holes into his brain. His hands were shaking, his knees were trembling. The light came on with a sudden flash. Again, nothing. There was absolutely nothing there. He shined the light in all directions, hoping to find some evidence, some indication that something was there. Broken branches, footprints, anything! But there was none. There was no sign of anything passing through the brush. No sign of anything walking along the trail. My father, an expert hunter, could find no trace of the thing that was stalking him. Could I be sleeping? Is this a dream? This was the only explanation my mind could conjure up. He gave himself a tap on the face, pinched his own arm, hoping to rouse himself from slumber. Instead, he only flinched from the pain. He was awake. Of that he was certain. He shined the light further up the trail and saw something. A building, stone and steel, the coal chute. If he could just reach it. Without reservation, he bolted for it. He could hear its strides coming up fast from behind him. He turned into the coal chute and dove in. It collapsed around him, sending him pouring down onto slate and rock. Quickly he made his way to his feet, shining the light towards the chute, the shotgun in firing position. He could hear it moving up the trail, and it was fast. He heard it hit the coal chute. It thundered and shuddered under its weight. But my father couldn't see anything. He blindly fired, pumped, and fired again, and again, and again. The boom of his shotgun echoed throughout the valley. The sound matched only by the roar made his hair stand on the back of his neck stand on end. The chute was silent for a moment. Then he heard its strides bolt in the opposite direction. It made its way up the mountain trail, towards the mine. He stood in darkness. He waited for a long time, listening, till he heard the faint chirps of crickets break the silence. He made it home around noon, beaten up pretty badly from his fall. He wouldn't speak a word. My mother attempted to console him, but was only met by this silent look of despair. His eyes filled with dread like I had never seen before, and his ever-present smile was gone. Not long after, he and my mother separated. The court ordered that the house should be turned over to me upon my 21st birthday. The summer before my senior year in college, I returned home to find him sitting on the porch, shotgun in hand. He had long since erected a security fence enclosed around the entire property. He told me his tale. He told me how he continued to hear it when he walked to his mother's, when he trimmed the hedges and mowed the lawn. He could hear it following him. Ever presently, it stalked him, hunted him. After he passed, I left the house empty. It didn't feel right taking it when he had built it from the ground up. But then I met the woman who would become my wife. Now we are married and soon expecting our son. I brought them back to here, to raise my family where I was raised. I record this now because I am afraid. Each night I do a quick sweep of the property. I check the house, then I check the yard, and each night I can hear my footsteps echoing beyond the fence.